This is Canada Reads American Style, featuring two friends who love Canada Reads and Canadian literature. Welcome our host Rebecca from Michigan and Tara from Ontario. Hi everyone, it is Rebecca. Welcome to our latest episode of Hidden Gems, in which we invite guests to recommend authors or titles that may be new to us. Today I'm excited to introduce author Marion Agnew, whose debut novel, Making Up the Gods, from Latitude 46 Publishing, was released in October 2023. Kirkus Reviews calls it, quote, a complex, heartwarming tale of love, absolution, and fortitude, unquote. Marion began writing creative nonfiction in the late 1990s after her mother's diagnosis with Alzheimer's. Her essays were collected in Reverberations, A Daughter's Meditations on Alzheimer's, published in 2019 by Signature Editions. It was shortlisted for the Louise de Kiriline Lawrence Award. A dual citizen of the U.S. and Canada, Marion lives and writes in Shuniah, a community north of Thunder Bay on Lake Superior in Robinson Superior Treaty Territory of the Anishinaabe and Métis peoples. Welcome, Marion.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
And I just want to say to everyone, I interviewed Marion about Making Up the Gods on July 8th, 2024, and I will link to the interview in the show notes. And I just want to say that I'm so thrilled that Kirkus Reviews gave you such a positive review. It was, of course, deserved, but hopefully we'll get this word out there for more and more people, especially in the United States, to read your book because your novel was just fabulous, as you know, because I rave about it to everyone.
Well, thank you so much. And it is nice to be able to cross the border in that way to find people and places that have reach on the other side. So that's nice.
Yeah. And I'm going to reach out to more of my library colleagues in Michigan, especially because I did look up to see how many books we have a statewide system, and I looked to see how many copies were in our system statewide, and there was one. And I thought, oh, I have friends. I'm going to really see if I can get them to add it to their collection. So we'll see what
Well,
we
I'm
can
just
do.
glad there's one. That's a start.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, well, let's get started. I am so excited to have you here to talk about some titles or authors that you want to recommend to us. So I will turn it over to you and go ahead and get started.
Awesome. Well, I have 6 books by 4 different writers. And these are the books that have stayed with me. And they are also the books that help me feel that my voice would be welcome in the Canadian writing world. So that,
Oh,
I mean, I read a lot of books. I love books. There's so many great books out there, but I want to share that part of my reading history. So the first category, I'll pick fiction. This is 2 titles of fiction, and they are Marina Endicott's contemporary novels. She's better known as a historical fiction writer, I believe. Her most recent book is called The Observer, and it's set in the 20th century, but it's a ways back there. I believe this. I don't remember when it was set. Sorry,
hmm
but anyway, the novels I'm more interested in are her earlier novels. One is Good to a Fault from 2009, and the other is Close to Hugh from 2015. Good to a Fault won the Commonwealth Writers' Prize for Canada and the Caribbean and was a finalist for the Scotiabank Gilla Award. And it's about a woman named Clara Purdy, who is 43, and she lives quietly and comfortably in Saskatoon, but she's actually really kind of stuck in life. You know, she works in insurance. Her parents have both passed. She has no husband or children. And one night in July, she's in a car accident. And whoever is technically at fault, she feels responsible. I mean, she knows insurance, so she knows about fault and who technically should be taking care of stuff. But she takes on helping this family because she's a very quote unquote good person, and it's the right thing to do. And it examines over the course of a year kind of this balance between being good and being at fault. And,
mm
you know, why it speaks to me is it centers a woman of middle age. And it's a complicated kind of ethical dilemma that she's bringing on herself. The prose is beautiful, the characterizations are all multi layered. And so here's a quote. The question she asked herself was this: what was her liability? How much of all this was her fault? And how much did she owe or could she expect in compensation? So one of the questions it tackles is, what does it mean to be good? You know, and I, as someone who has been interested in kind of those big questions, I really responded to this novel, and I find it funny and interesting and realistic too. So those are why it stayed with me this long.
Yeah, it's interesting because I feel like the just more now and even in the recent past, nobody takes accountability for anything. So does it kind of touch on that idea of accountability? Because I feel like people don't make sincere apologies. They don't, like I say, take accountability for the wrongs they may have committed. Does it kind of touch on that really?
Not explicitly, but there
Hmm.
is, I think a lot of that is also driven, especially in the States, by litigation. So you
Oh,
can't say you're sorry because that means that you have some responsibility and then they can sue you for something.
yeah. Yeah, you're right.
And it's a little bit different in Canada, but there's still that feeling, I think, of, well, you've done what you could. It wasn't really your fault, but these people need something. And she kind of needed a project. I mean, in that way, it's maybe a little bit like Jane Austen's Emma. She was kind of at loose ends looking for a project, but it's really about finding yourself and giving what you can. And I found it really relatable.
Yeah. That sounds interesting. All right.
So her second novel that I wanted to talk about is called Close to Hugh. I believe it was called Utopia for a while,
Hmm.
um, but it's from 2015 and was longlisted for the Scotiabank Giller. And a brief summary is middle-aged Hugh Argyle owns and runs an art gallery, and he's surrounded by creative people, both in his age group and in like the high school younger generation. And one September day, he falls off a ladder. And so, over the course of the next week or so, he starts to feel the effects of this. He's always been the one kind of holding everybody's lives together. And so, what happens when all these friends who have their various challenges, how can he help them when he's not maybe 100%? He's been the stable center. So, he kind of starts to feel some of these effects of his fall. And why I really like it is it's about artists. It's about all kinds of artists, actors and directors and theater types and visual artists as well as writers. The prose is really exuberant and
Hmm.
funny. It's full of puns on Hugh, and one of the other characters is named Ivy. And so I never tired of those, although some people in my book club did. But I thought they were hilarious.
Yeah.
And again, it's attention to middle-aged people and parents and what do you do when your kids are growing up but they're not quite out, and all of those questions that we have. These are people in their 50s, but they're not like Sex in the City people in their 50s.
Yeah.
You're like us regular folks. So I like that a lot. And what does it mean to be successful, how to be in community and how not to be in community, and how to come back from a perceived failure. So all of those are really interesting things for me to look at in my own work, and I enjoy spending time with people who are so smart and write
Yeah.
about them so well.
Oh, I love that. These are okay. Those are you kicked it off really well with those first two titles. Keep going.
Well, I will say that Close to Hugh is a bit of a doorstopper, so it's kind of thick, but I found it worth it. So,
Okay. Okay.
your mileage may vary. So my next category is nonfiction, and for these I will pick two books of essays by a writer called, her name is Barbara McLean. The first is called Lamb's Quarters: Scenes from a Handmade Life, and that was published in 2002. And its sort of sequel is Shepherd's Sight: A Farming Life, and that was published in 2024. And if you look her up online, there's an interview with her and her husband, who's a retired country doctor named Thomas Wills, on TVO. So that's interesting to see if you're interested. But anyway, both of these books describe Barbara McLean's life with her husband, who's a physician, on a sheep farm in Alderney in Grey County, Ontario, which is kind of west of Barrie and on Georgian Bay on Lake Huron. It's a big county, and it's a lot of farming, fairly rural. And the first book chronicles how they got there. They were youthful idealists. I should say Barbara is, I believe, in her 70s now. They were youthful idealists, how they did become part of the community, kind of, how they learned community expectations, their neighbors who helped just showed up with snowplow equipment or whatever. They made improvements to the farm. They learned to raise sheep. They had kids. They came into their own as farmers. And I love that book so much. When I first got here, that I turned it over and started over at the beginning and read it completely all the way through again.
Wow.
She spins wool. They've chosen their sheep for the wool. They supply spinners. It's really about a person in a landscape, and I'm just such a sucker for that. And then Shepherd's Sight is the sort of sequel, and it's published 22 years later, and so it's organized a little differently. It's set over the course of a year, and every month there's an activity that shepherds do, lambing, breeding, shearing, all of that stuff comes as the course of a year unwinds. And she also talks about how farming has changed during the 50 years that they've been doing it. And she's open about considering what's next for their couple and their farm. Their kids are grown now. The farm is not large enough for them to make a living by farming. And but her grandkids, she wants it to stay in the family. She's very aware that her own ancestors came over to find a better life, but pushed off people from the farm who had been living there for so long. And so she's wrestling with a lot of complicated questions about this place that she loves so much. And they're not, it's not confessional. It's not, we buried some guy in the back 40. It's not a true crime thing, but it's not preachy. They're rooted in her place. They're a window into the world I never thought I would care about. If you had asked me if I was interested in Shepherd, I would say probably not really.
Yeah.
But she draws you in. It's beguiling, and it's the story of people in this world, and that's that's what makes the world interesting, I think.
Yeah.
She's now in her 70s, so she's vital and interested and active, really thoughtful, and I think it's important to hear what people with her experience have to offer as their world is changing.
Yeah. Now, it's interesting because you didn't think you'd read something like this. So what attracted you to it? Like was it a recommendation from someone else, or what made you jump into this nonfiction collection of
Well,
essays?
here is my dirty little secret. When we first moved here, there was not a independent bookstore. We have a Chapters Indigo, and so I would haunt Chapters Indigo and look at their sale table. And I didn't double check this before I sat down with you, but I'm guessing that the hardback was on the sale table,
Hmm.
the $5 or three for $10 table. And it has a beautiful cover. It's got wildflowers on it. And it looked interesting and beautiful. And that's how I picked it up. And it was like I said, I couldn't get over how amazing this closely observed and really rooted in place this
Hmm.
memoir was.
Yeah.
And so that's why I liked it so much. And I liked it so much that I haven't even like seen, I assume this first one is still in print. I haven't really looked, but I'm in a book club, and we choose books by presenting one. So if this is my year, I have a chance to present a book, and I'm not presenting this one because I love it too much. I don't want to discuss it. I don't want to hear how other people don't care about farming.
Oh my
Right?
gosh, I hear you on that. That is so funny. I know. I agree with you. You don't want someone to, I mean, even though we know everybody has their opinion about a book, if we love something so much, just keep it to yourself. Yeah, yeah.
Right. Right.
I totally I totally agree on that.
Right.
Okay, again, two other great choices. I mean, because it's really funny. I'm not a rural type reader either, but I think I would have grabbed it too, because there is something really seductive about essays, just to learn somebody else's point of view. And I just love that it's very confessional, but not, that's too strong of a word, but I just love reading other people's essays. I just think that's
Mhm.
fabulous.
It's
Yeah.
they're very honest,
Hmm.
and she also, talks about, well, I mean, in the first collection, of course, the second collection is interesting because of the succession question. But in her first book, she writes about expectations, cultural expectations, and how they were city folk and they moved to the country and they thought, oh, we'll be going into Toronto because it's, a couple of hours. And then pretty soon they weren't. And their Toronto friends weren't just running out, to have dinner and then running home. And she also talks about being invited to a wedding shower and you're supposed to write down advice for the new bride and whatever. And she was like, I'm not really sure I can write what I wanted to write, which is have your own money, always have a job of your own. That kind of independence of spirit, she wasn't quite sure how that fit. And I think that's true of any community. I mean, I don't think it has to be rural, but
Hmm.
that question of do you fit is really vulnerable to offer as a question. So, and I don't think, as I said, it's not anything terrible is revealed, but that vulnerability, I think, helps the novel be relatable or the essays be relatable.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, that's fascinating.
And this might be of interest to Tara, who loves Helen Humphreys, but her second book, the Shepherd's Sight, the one that takes place over the course of a year, was blurbed by Helen Humphreys.
Ooh, okay.
So,
Yeah. I wanted to pick it up already, but I guarantee you Tara will want to pick this up as well. So, wow, thank you. Thank you for that. Okay, your last
my
two?
last two are novels about Northwestern Ontario because they're just so much fun. One of them is We're All in This Together. I'll talk about that one first. We Are All in This Together by Amy Jones. It came out in 2016 and it was a finalist for the Leacock Medal for Humor, among other awards. And it's about a woman who goes over a waterfall, a video going viral, which, in 2016 was a little bit different. It's 10 years now, a video goes viral and a family starts going into meltdown. And it's set in Northwestern Ontario in Thunder Bay. It's again an intergenerational story. Characters range from high school to a matriarch, family matriarch, and it was made into a movie in 2021. So
Oh.
there's that. I think it was on the kind of festival circuit type.
Mm-hmm.
And Amy's short fiction, I mean, she's written three novels altogether and a short story collection, and her voice is always really strong in these novels. The characters have unique perspectives, and there's sort of moments that make you go, "Wait a sec, what did she just say?" And so it's just really, really fun to read. And it's a
Yeah.
perennial favorite at our independent bookstore, which is Andershine Bookshop. And then my last book is called The Lightkeeper's Daughters. It's by Jeannie Penzawal, and it's from 2017. And it's a dual timeline historical novel. I'm not much one for all historical novels, but this one, of course, it's set on Porphyry Island, which is an island in Lake Superior, and in present day Thunder Bay. And it's so richly detailed. It's a family who keeps the lighthouse, Lightkeeper's Daughters, there on Porphyry Island, and Lake Superior is really a character unto its own. Jeannie's known for her children's books, possibly more. Her recent picture book, Skating Wild on an Inland Sea, just won the Governor General's Award.
Oh.
This has that same attention to the mood of the lake and how your future can change in an instant. So it's really neat to see one of these historical novels about the place that we live on a bookshelf. And people also love lighthouses. I didn't know that, but it's kind of like cats. There's people who just love a lighthouse anywhere.
I'm one of those people because I actually, in the United States, we have a passport, a lighthouse passport. And when you get 60 lighthouses in your passport, you get a patch. I'm only about a third of the way in terms of seeing my lighthouses, but I'm one day I will get a patch and I'm all excited. But yeah. So some of us are complete, lighthouse nerds.
It's
So
fine. I mean,
yeah,
that's great. That was the part of me of it that speaks to me of obviously is the setting. And
yeah,
also it features a woman who's young in the historical timeline and then in the present day, pre-pandemic present day timeline is more elderly. And so it's interesting to hear that perspective also.
yeah.
Always, I'm always a fan of the older woman.
So your character in Making Up the Gods, Simone, is one of my favorite characters. I have to tell you, I think of Simone a lot. And I'm not just saying that because you're in front of me and we're talking, but she resonated with me so much. And as you're talking about these books, I can see why you were drawn to them and why you created someone like Simone, who's such a compelling character. So, since you started at the beginning, that you said these are books that helped you believe that you had a voice in Canadian literature. Can you
Mhm.
talk a little bit about that? That's really fascinating.
Sure. Well, part of it is being an American citizen. I mean, my mother was Canadian, and we've had a connection to this place for a really long time. But when you move here, it's different. And I kind of didn't want to inflict myself on the Canadian literary landscape. And also, there's also, I mean, as we have seen in the past 5 years for sure, 10 years a little bit even, there's much more attention to excluded voices being brought to the forefront. And so I didn't want to make sure I didn't step on those toes. I don't want to tell stories instead of stories that haven't been told.
Mm-hmm.
But I just kept feeling, as with my mother in dementia, and I just kept feeling that there was something to this story that I wanted to tell. And I wasn't like what I knew about the Canadian literary scene when I moved there was as embarrassing as most Americans. You know, I knew Alice Munro. I'd heard of Michael Ondaatje because of The English Patient.
Mm-hmm.
And Leonard Cohen was somebody. I wasn't sure if he was a singer or a poet, but that was basically all I knew. I mean, I'd heard Robertson Davies. There were some other names that I was sort of vaguely familiar with, but I really didn't know what there was out there.
Mm-hmm.
And I still think you know, the American literary world has so many more people in it that there's much more siloed genres. You know, the label is much more important there.
Mm-hmm.
And when I moved here, the line between what a marketer might describe as literary fiction or a romance or upmarket book club fiction, those are a lot gentler, I would say, in Canada.
Mm-hmm.
And so I knew I didn't want to write what Americans would consider a romance because the love story is not necessarily the point. And I was looking for people who kind of were writing the same books. And I don't necessarily know where my books would be put on a shelf because the story is important, the writing is important, the characters are important, and it's not like I don't try to write quirky for the sake of writing quirky either. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so you know, it does, which I don't want to necessarily categorize literary fiction in that way, but sometimes I don't have patience for a lot of literary devices or literary experimentation for the sake of experimentation.
Mm-hmm.
So those are all those kind of questions. And I'd be standing in the bookstore looking around going, I don't know where if I were to write a book back then, I don't know where it would fit because
Mm-hmm.
I don't, doesn't really feel like this or that. So I just started reading. I don't know if I got Marina Endicott's first book, Good to a Fault, off the remainder table too. It's possible.
Mm-hmm.
It's possible I started reading a Giller nominee. I'm not sure where that came from, but but you know, being welcomed into, I mean, it's Saskatoon, so it's not even Northwestern Ontario, but being kind of welcomed into a life that I could relate to, of a 43-year-old kind of casting about for where she belongs in the world now. That that helped me feel that, oh, okay, well, there are stories like this in this landscape north of the border. And I had to go through a little bit of soul searching too when it came time for publishing, because again, that whole thing of my voice is hardly underrepresented in among literature.
Mm-hmm.
But I thought I would see, and I'm grateful that Latitude 46 took a risk. And
Yeah.
yeah,
I do want to give a shout out to Latitude 46 because I've read a number of their books and I think they're a fabulous publisher, and I'm going to link to them as well because seriously, I've read a number of their books and I've really enjoyed all of them that I've had. It's interesting that you say that because when I think about Making Up the Gods, and this wasn't, I swear, I wasn't planning on necessarily talking about it in a big way, but here's what's interesting. I wanted that kind of a story. It's an older woman, it's a young boy, and then a man. sort of in between their ages, I think. And it's such a compelling story, right? And those are the kind of stories I really love. I don't really read genre type, books all that much. And so it's interesting when you say you don't know where it sort of fits. And here's what I will say. Those are the kind of books I look for. And in the US, I've had more difficulty kind of finding those titles like in my reading life until I really got into reading Canadian literature. But I feel like I see this type of story a lot in Canada that I wasn't seeing in the US, which is really interesting. I had to work really hard to find, and I worked in a library for all those years, right? So I was always having a hard time finding those kinds of stories that weren't sort of like the traditional romance or something, a story that just talks about real people living real lives and something you can identify with because it's all the human emotion that we feel, but it isn't that romance piece of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I just feel like Canada does that better. So I sort of, in my novice way, I would say, I feel like your books especially fit into this landscape from my point of view in terms of what I've read in terms of Canadian literature. So I just want to throw that out there.
Yeah, well, thanks. Yeah, it feels comfortable to me. And truthfully, I think all of those genre lines are shifting even in the States. Liz Moore's God of the Woods is a story about a summer camp where a crime happened and all the main characters are women. The, you know, the camp counselor, the camper that's gone, the mom, the matriarch of the family, the detective. It's really interesting, the women, and it's told from their perspective. And so I don't know where that would be. Is that considered literary fiction? And it only matters in that it helps people find the books that they enjoy,
Mm-hmm.
like you say. So yeah, and there's nothing wrong with love, obviously, but there's all kinds of love.
Yeah. Can I jump in and ask? I didn't tell you I was going to ask you this, but are you working on anything that we can anticipate? So, and when might that be?
I don't have any dates. I don't have a finished product that's out, even being shopped around,
Hmm.
but I am working. I am working on a book. So yeah.
Okay.
And on my tombstone, it's going to say, "Is it possible I'm making this too hard?" Because that is apparently what I do. So,
Is it the research part of it, or what is it? What is it like that you
it's
make it
it's the
difficult?
story. Like
Oh.
I have actually a novel, a draft of a novel plotted out. I know where it's going. I know who's in it. And I was looking at it, and every single one of the people with agency is a man. And I don't want to
Mm.
write that story. It was bugging me. Something
Hmm.
about it just didn't sit right, and it was bothering me, and I was making it too complicated. So there's that. But
Yeah.
it it didn't fit me anymore. I had started it during the pandemic, and so I've been having to make all kinds of changes because I had to write about the pandemic so that I could stop writing about the pandemic, if that makes sense.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
anyway, yeah, I'm aware of my what I want to be writing about, and I'm trying to make the story that I'm telling more suited to that because it's there's a lot of interesting stuff in this world.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Okay. Well, I personally am just going to stay, calm. I'll be patient and then I'll just wait till your next book comes out. And I would love to have you come back at that time. But I just want to say thank you so much for giving us some really, really great titles to consider reading. Thank you.
Oh, you're very welcome. Thank you for asking. It's really fun to talk about other writers' books. It's really great.
I love it. Okay. Happy reading, everyone.
Thank you for joining us on our bookish journey. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing, rating, and reviewing Canada Reads American Style wherever you listen. You can connect with the podcast and Rebecca on Instagram at Canada Reads American Style and with Tara at On a Branch Reads. Until next time, keep reading.